Okay, welcome back to another episode of BYU-I Fish Guy. I'm actually wearing my BYU Idaho shirt today. Last time in the episode that I did, we talked a bit about the overall biology of fishes. We talked a lot about the basic classification of fishes, the three different classes. We talked mostly about jawless fishes, cartilaginous fishes, and also bony fishes. As a preface to the rest of this channel, and also as a clarification, this channel is specifically geared towards the freshwater fishes of North America, specifically north of Mexico, in compliance with the 2011 edition of Page and Burr's Freshwater Fishes of North America and North of Mexico. So we'll be basically going over all of the basic regions and the types of fishes, specifically at the family and genus level, and some species of all the different fishes in North America. I might diverge a little bit and talk about marine species as well, but mostly this is a freshwater anadromous, catadromous panel to basically make viewers or help viewers become more familiar with the fish species that inhabit North America specifically. And last time, as I mentioned in the comments section, the order for the coelacanths is actually Coelacanthiformes. It's not Latimeriiformes like it used to be. That's a recent change. Also, Lepidosireformes is not the order of lungfishes. Lungfishes are actually in the order Ceratodontiformes. But most of those are tropical fishes that are found outside of North America. So we won't really be talking about them in great detail. I'll just use those as examples of the biology of fishes. So this episode is actually specifically on lampreys. So we talked a bit last time about the agnathins. Agnathins, as we know, is a term that literally means no jaws. So agnathins are what we call jawless fishes. And because they're jawless fishes, as you can imagine, they have no jaws. Even these fishes actually have no true bone. The diagram I showed you last time, where I represented Petromyzontiformes and also where I represented Myxiniformes as sister groups. Based on recent research or reading I have done, this is actually completely wrong. That is wrong. This is not correct in representing at all the agnathins. Cyclostomata used to be the term that describes all of the agnathins or all of the jawless fishes specifically. But recent molecular evidence, specifically using the cytochrome B gene, actually have demonstrated that Petromyzontiformes or the lampreys and Myxiniformes or hagfishes are not in the same group. In fact, many zoologists today specifically state, based on genetic research, that Myxiniformes or the hagfishes are actually not even true vertebrates. They're chordate invertebrates that are much more closely related to the tunicates, lancelets, and other invertebrate groups that are similar to the fishes and similar to vertebrates, but not quite the same. So from now on, in all these videos, whenever I talk about hagfishes or lampreys, I will always refer to them separately. So lampreys, represented by the order Petromyzontiformes, is actually the sister group to all of the other vertebrates. They're very primitive, the most primitive group of fishes that we know of today. And we'll talk a little bit more about those. In fact, this whole episode is all about what lampreys are, where they fit in the North American freshwater fish fauna or ichthyofauna, and specifically about their biology, classification, etc. So when it comes to lampreys as a group, as I've already mentioned, they are jawless fishes. They do not have any jaws at all. I like to draw my lampreys kind of like this. They have a basic structure where they have an oral hood or an oral disc. And we'll get into the oral hood. We'll talk about the life cycle of these fishes and more specifically about how these fish have evolved and also how the life cycle works. They have this basic design and they have a tail that is very, very strange. I'm actually not sure if you can see that, so I'm actually going to redraw this illustration. Lampreys are very eel-like in their design. They have a very long cylindrical body. They have an oral disc. And the oral disc is actually very interesting. It's very circular, hence the term cyclostomata, meaning circular mouth. And it has a lot of teeth. There's a very wide concentric pattern of teeth all the way around, several rows of these. Lampreys can actually be very uniquely identified by the specific pattern of teeth that they have in their oral disc inside their mouth, of course, without any true jaws. Lampreys are characterized by a very interesting tail. They have, unlike an eel, they have an upper dorsal fin, they have an anal fin, but they have this tail called a diaphysersal tail. And I'll actually draw out what that looks like. And you can see it in the illustration there. Diaphysersal basically means the vertebral column of the tail itself attaches all the way to the very end of the tail without going upward. The tail itself is asymmetrical about the vertebral column, or basically the end of the fish itself. In fact, this is a very poor illustration. I'll draw this out a little bit better. You have the vertebrae right here, and you have mostly cylindrical tail divided. And this vertebral column actually extends all the way to the very end of the tail itself. Then you have all the different elements of rays in there. So diaphysersal, that's the term that describes the tail of a lamprey. Lampreys also have a single nostril, and that single nostril is between the eyes of the lamprey. And behind those nostrils, they have a pineal eye. In other words, like an extrasensory organ, specifically. Lampreys also have 7 pairs of gill openings on either side of their bodies. This is a characteristic that all lampreys have. Here's the 7th opening right there. Of course, my drawing is exaggerated to show exactly, or not precisely where the parts are, but more generally where the parts would be located on the body of a lamprey. Lampreys, as we already noted, have no true jaws. They have teeth, but they don't have any jaws at all. They actually have no true bone either. They're cartilaginous in the skeleton. We mentioned this in the previous lecture. Lampreys have absolutely no bone whatsoever. And so that makes them a very unique group of fishes in that regard. They also have 2 semicircular canals. And what we mean by that is, if you imagine to yourself, what is the human ear like? That's basically the semicircular canal. So in the ear of a fish, you have these ear bones called otoliths. They're not true bone per se. They're more like ear stones that help with the balance of a fish. And so lampreys are unique in the sense that they have 2 of these semicircular canals, and that makes them very, very interesting fishes. They're very bizarre in many ways. They actually don't really have what you call true scales. They have thick coats of slime all over them. They also are very, very slippery. In fact, in my experience coming from Maine, there's a couple of different locations where I've seen lampreys, not in person, but I've definitely been to habitats where you can actually find lampreys in Maine. Specifically, Maine has what's called the sea lamprey, which is Petromyzon marinus, one of the more interesting species of lampreys found in North America, in my opinion. But these are some of the more distinguishing characteristics of lampreys. Because lampreys are often hard to identify as adults, there's a couple of other ways we can identify them. The specific shape of the fins is often used as a diagnostic characteristic for determining what type of lamprey we're looking at. Also, there are these V-shaped muscles called myomeres. And specifically, the trunk myomeres are used a lot in determining what species of lamprey we're specifically looking at. And so many old textbooks and many old field manuals of lampreys specifically will go through the count of myomeres or V-shaped muscles in the body to determine precisely what species. Today, principally, we can use mitochondrial DNA. We can use cytochrome B. Cytochrome B is actually a very good way, generally, to understand the molecular biology of a fish and where those fish fit in the evolutionary tree. So this is my, or we could say Daniel's, generalized explanation or drawing of a lamprey. Lampreys are quite an interesting assemblage of fish, as we'll talk about. So this is basically what a lamprey looks like. There's many different species. There's 46 species of lampreys altogether, most of them in the Northern Hemisphere. But before we go into more of the details of life history of lampreys, I want to briefly describe where lampreys come from in the fossil record. Lampreys are very interesting creatures in the sense that they evolved approximately 300 million years ago in what we call the Pennsylvanian. The very first jawless fishes or cyclostomes or agnathans actually appear around 550 million years ago. These are some of the first fishes we actually find in the fossil record. We mentioned last time the ichthyofauna is the first genus of fish that appears in the fossil record, and that's approximately 550 million years ago or so. And this is at a time called the Cambrian. The Cambrian was a very interesting time in geological history because the Cambrian was a time of explosion. The Cambrian explosion is a time in Earth's history when every single animal body plan, or phyla, as we mentioned phyla last time, is an overall group of animals that share common characteristics, all phyla evolved at this time. And that's why we call it the explosion. About 100 million year time frame, and some estimates make it a little bit less, maybe 80, 90 million years, all animal phyla had evolved, including the chordates. The very first chordates were these primitive fishes, these primitive jawless fishes that, of course, swam around in the Cambrian oceans. And so these were non-petromyzontid or lamprey jawless fishes. These were more similar to hagfishes, which today number about 76 species. Later on in geological history, in the Devonian, about 250 million years later, most of the jawless fishes go extinct. Most species are gone. And so by the time we get to roughly 400 million years ago or so, or even a lot later in geological time, to within about 300 million years ago, that's when we basically see a wide extinction of pretty much all of the jawless fishes. In fact, most are gone. This is a time called the Devonian mass extinction, but there are some jawless fishes that still survive today. And so that's where pretty much all the modern hagfishes and even the lampreys come back onto the scene. So roughly about 300 million years ago, or a little bit less than that, in what we call the Pennsylvanian time period of the Carboniferous, that's when the petromyzontid, that's specifically when the lampreys appear. And lamprey taxonomy and lamprey biogeography, zoogeography today is represented by the split between the two supercontinents, Gondwana and Laurasia. So Gondwana was primarily in the northern region of the Earth, and Laurasia was primarily more of a southern place. And so these were the two major splits in the geological regions of the world at this time. By the end of the Cretaceous, when the dinosaurs died out, we see that the continents started to diverge. But by the end of the Carboniferous into the Permian, and also towards the end of the Permian to the Triassic, we see this very large split between the continents of Gondwana land and Laurasia. And that's where we see the current zoogeography of lampreys. So if we imagine to ourselves lampreys as a group today, there's 46 species. In fact, that's a very important number. Lampreys number 46 species total. And one family in particular, a family that we call Petromyzontidae, which is spelled like this. Petromyzontidae includes what we call the northern lampreys. And northern lampreys number 42 species. So most of all the lamprey species are northern. So 42 out of these 46 species of lampreys are northern lampreys. And of course, as the name suggests, they're holarctic. They're found in the northern hemisphere, both in North America and in Eurasia. There are 4 species that are found in the southern hemisphere, but these 4 species, of course, are not really as diverse as the northern lamprey family. Historically speaking, 4 different families have been identified. One of these families is only known from fossils, only known from the fossil record. One family, of course, I've already mentioned, the Petromyzontidae, is found only in the northern hemisphere. And 2 of these families, of course, are restricted to the southern hemisphere. Since we're specifically talking about North American freshwater fishes, I'm only going to mention Petromyzontidae and some of the key genera found in that family. I'm not going to describe in great detail any other group of lampreys specifically in any sense of the word. So what I find really interesting about the taxonomy of lampreys is that lampreys, of course, include all of these different species, but it's actually a very, very small number of species compared to other families of fishes. In fact, in North America, the biggest family today is Cyprinidae, arguably Leucistidae, depending on the exact taxonomy you're going to follow. But there's about 300 species approximately. Really, it's about 261, but almost 300 species of minnows in the family Cyprinidae. So the fact that we have 42 species in the family Petromyzontidae altogether is not a very big amount. In fact, it's very tiny compared to the approximately 35,000 species of fishes that we find around the world in both fresh and salt water. What's really cool about lampreys is that they can either be parasitic or they could be non-parasitic. There are 18 species in particular that are parasitic. And what we mean by parasitic is that they attach themselves onto hosts. Usually the hosts that they attach themselves onto are other fishes. For instance, when the sea lamprey made its way into the Great Lakes region, the Great Lakes basin, it often attaches itself by its oral disc onto lake trout, and it has completely decimated the lake trout fishery that used to exist in the Great Lakes region. And so that's exactly what we're seeing with parasitic lampreys. Non-parasitic lampreys have a very different strategy. They don't actually attach themselves onto anything. They don't bite onto their prey. They don't suck the fluids or blood out of their prey like the parasitic lampreys do. And also they have very different life histories. And so the sea lamprey is the only species that's predominantly marine. Again, we mentioned the genus name that is Petromyzon, and also its species name is Marinus, so Petromyzon marinus. All other lampreys, or most others, are pretty much restricted to freshwater environments. In fact, there are different life history strategies that we see among the lampreys. For the most part, lampreys will dig very shallow pits, especially in the gravelly areas upstream, because they typically ascend upstream to spawn. The larvae of a lamprey is called an ammosiote. Ammociotes are almost identical to the adults. They only have a couple of differences. They have no oral teeth. They have an oral hood. In fact, the oral hood looks kind of like this. And they have the teeth that look just like that. They have no true teeth at all. They have a mouth. So here's my rough estimation, my rough sketch of an oral hood of a Petromyzon species. They have no eyes like the adults do. And what they do is actually bury themselves in sediment, and they feed on detritus and other microorganisms until they reach maturity. The actual development process from ammociote to adult can take 3 to 8 years. And depending on if the lamprey is a parasitic lamprey or a non-parasitic lamprey, ultimately depends or determines what kind of life it will live as an adult. Many of the non-parasitic lampreys actually have a very reduced digestive tract when they're adults after they metamorphose from larvae to adult. And so what happens is they actually die after they're done spawning. Many of the parasitic lampreys have the capacity to actually reproduce continuously throughout their lives and to feed throughout their lives. So there's a lot of differences in life cycles and life histories of these lampreys. Something else that's very, very interesting among the lampreys is this concept of paired species. How some of the larvae of one species can actually go on to be non-parasitic, and some can actually go on to be parasitic. And that makes them very, very interesting creatures. So lampreys, of course, have a very diverse life history. There's a lot of different genera of lampreys, and they have a wide variety of unique attributes. The diversity of their unique characteristics is not as great as you would find in other groups. As you can see from their generalized anatomy, they're actually very simple compared to other fishes. And so there's a few characteristics that can easily distinguish a lamprey from anything else, including the fact that they have an oral disc and no true jaws, and of course the holes on the side of the head, well, not really holes, but the gill holes that allow them to breathe. And so they are very, very unique creatures overall, very unique fishes that allow them in order to basically survive in all kinds of environments. Most lampreys in North America in particular, they love to live in river habitats. Lampreys are widely distributed. There's lampreys all throughout the eastern United States and North America. They're common in the southeastern region. Like I said, there's some in Maine. There's the sea lamprey. There's the northern brook lamprey. There's lots of lampreys in the Great Lakes region. They're a very interesting, diverse group of animals. And considering how unique they are biologically, and considering how unique they are in an evolutionary sense, it gives us all the more reason to preserve them so we can understand evolutionary relationships much better among the fishes, especially here in North America. Some of the more representative genera that are found in North America, in fact, the basal genera of the family Petromyzontidae, are ichthyomyzin and also petromyzin. And those are spelled as such. There's petromyzin, and then there's ichthyomyzin. And so these are not the only genera that we find in North America, but these are representative of basically many of the species that we do find in North America. And so I hope that this lecture is helpful in at least giving a basic outline of what lampreys are, their life history, how they reproduce, and essentially how they feed. The feeding mechanism is actually quite fascinating because they literally attach themselves onto their prey if they're parasitic, and they use a sharp projection on their tongue to pierce into their prey. And after piercing into the prey, they actually suck the bodily fluids from the animal. In fact, I'll post some future videos and even pictures on our Facebook page to show you exactly what a lamprey is. In fact, my personal profile, not profile, my background picture is that of a lamprey. They have a very cool circular mouth. And so lampreys are some of the more interesting and unique fishes that we find in North America. They could easily be confused for eels. That's probably the only group that they could be confused for. But remember, lampreys, unlike eels, do have a separation between the fins. They have a diphysersal fin on the tail. Eels have a continuous caudal, anal, and also dorsal fin. So one continuous fin altogether all the way around. Also, eels have a true head. Well, they both have a true head. They have true jaws. So this would be more like what an eel would look like. Not that it's an accurate representation, but a lamprey has no jaws. They both have heads. They both have teeth, but lampreys have a very unique assemblage of teeth in the oral disc. So if you're ever around an eel versus a lamprey, just look for those characteristics. Look for the continuous caudal, dorsal, and anal fin for a lamprey. And also, I'm sorry, not for lamprey, for an eel. And look for the diphysersal tail, specifically of a lamprey. And that's one good way to distinguish them. Look for gill holes versus actual operculum, which you find in eels, where you can, and it's very similar, of course, to that of, say, other types of fishes like bass or even salmon. Also look for the oral disc compared to that of eels, which don't have an oral disc. They actually have true jaws with very, very tiny, tiny teeth in those jaws. I'll do a whole episode about the family, specifically Anguillidae, which is, the freshwater eel family. And we'll talk about Anguilla rostrata, which is the American eel, the only species of freshwater eel in North America. And so I hope that you enjoyed this video. Give it a like, and please subscribe to the channel for more interesting facts about fish. This is my first episode on lampreys, probably the only episode I'll do on lampreys because there's not a whole lot of species in North America. I might do a follow-up video and just talk about some of the basic species of lampreys and their biology and life history. But other than that, there's a good overview of lampreys. I'll give you more information in the comments and also in the description of the video. So please give it a like, subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Have a good day and fish on.